The morning started quietly in Seattle. The rain had stopped, leaving a thin mist floating over the street outside Miller & Co. Jewelers, a small family-owned store tucked between a cafe and a flower shop. Inside, Ethan Miller was polishing, the glass counters humming softly to the old radio playing in the background. He loved slow mornings like this, calm, unhurried, filled with the faint scent of coffee from next door. He wasn't just a jeweler, he was a listener, a quiet observer of people's stories told through the jewelry they chose, just before noon. The bell above the door chimed. Ethan looked up to see a woman step in. She had light brown hair tied loosely and eyes that looked tired but curious. She smiled politely, brushing a few raindrops off her coat. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm just looking." "Take your time," Ethan replied with his usual warmth. The woman's name was Lila Carter. She was in her late 20s, a graphic designer who had recently moved into the neighborhood. She walked slowly along the glass display, her fingers tracing the edges as if the pieces might whisper their secrets to her. Ethan noticed she paused at the rings, not the expensive diamond ones, but the simple silver and gold bands, the ones most people overlooked. After a few minutes, she looked up and asked, "Do you think size matters?" "Ah." Ethan blinked, unsure how to answer at first. "You mean ring size?" She laughed lightly, a little embarrassed by how it sounded. "Yeah, my boyfriend says it doesn't. He told me I could pick anything because a ring's just a ring. But I don't know. Some feel wrong, even if they look right." Ethan smiled faintly, leaning against the counter. "Sometimes it's not about size. It's about what fits, what feels right when it's on you." She tilted her head, intrigued. "You talk about jewelry like it's alive?" "In a way it is," he said. "Every piece carries a story. It's not just about sparkle or size. It's about connection." Lila's expression softened. She looked down at the display again, her thoughts clearly somewhere else. Ethan could tell there was something deeper behind her question. People often came into his store looking for more than metal and stones. They came searching for clarity. "Here," he said, opening the display case. "Try these 3. They're all the same design, but different sizes. See which one feels right." She hesitated, then slipped off her gloves. Her hands were slender, delicate. She picked up the first ring, a tiny gold band, and slid it onto her finger. "Too tight," she said, wrinkling her nose. "It's pretty, but uncomfortable." She tried the second one, a size larger. "This one's K," she said, turning it under the light. Fits, but it doesn't feel special." Then she tried the third one, a silver band with a single sapphire. It glimmered under the warm lights as she slipped it on. For a moment, her whole demeanor changed. Her shoulders relaxed and she smiled softly. "This one feels right," she said. Ethan watched her closely. "That's the one," he said quietly. "Sometimes you just know." Lila looked down at her hand, the sapphire reflecting in her eyes. "It's strange," she said. "I came here thinking size didn't matter, but maybe it's not about the ring at all. Maybe it's about how it makes you feel." Ethan nodded. "Exactly." She glanced at him then, a little longer than she meant to. "You sound like you've thought about this a lot." He chuckled softly. "When you spend your life selling engagement rings, you see a lot of people learn what matters and what doesn't." Lila laughed quietly, the first real laugh that day. "You sound like you've seen a few heartbreaks, too." "More than I can count," he said, smiling. "But I've also seen people find the right one after all the wrong ones. That makes it worth it." There was a pause, a soft, comfortable silence that felt like understanding. Lila turned the ring on her finger again, lost in thought. "My boyfriend, Evan," she said slowly, "doesn't really believe in gestures. He says love doesn't need proof. But sometimes I just want him to show that he cares." Ethan listened quietly. He had heard this before, from people who tried to convince themselves everything was fine when it wasn't. "Maybe he doesn't know how," he said gently. She sighed. "Maybe." After a while, she handed the ring back. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take your time," Ethan replied. "It's the right ring and the right reason always find their way." She smiled softly. "You're good at this, you know." Not just selling rings, making people think. That's dangerous, he said, half joking. Sometimes thinking too much makes people see what they were trying to ignore. Her smile faltered, but she didn't look away. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Ethan nodded, but didn't press further. She thanked him and left, the little bell above the door jingling as she disappeared into the rainy afternoon. He stood there for a while, staring at the empty space on the tray where the sapphire ring had been. Something about her lingered. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the usual sense. It was something more, a quiet sadness, a longing for something missing in her life. That evening, when Ethan closed the shop, he couldn't stop thinking about her question. Does size matter? It echoed in his mind, not as a joke or a riddle, but as a reflection of something deeper, how people measure love, comfort, and meaning. He thought about how often people settle for something that almost fits, because they're afraid to admit it doesn't. Maybe that's what Lila was doing in her own life, wearing something that wasn't meant for her, pretending it didn't matter. A week passed and life went on. Ethan sold a few rings, repaired a bracelet for a retired couple, and replaced a missing diamond for a nervous young man about to propose. But every time someone asked for help choosing a ring, he remembered Lila's expression, the mix of hope and hesitation when she wore that sapphire. Then, one quiet afternoon, the doorbell chimed again. Ethan looked up, and there she was. Her hair was damp from the rain, her cheeks pink from the cold. She smiled shyly. "Hi, you probably don't remember me." He did. "Of course I do," he said, stepping forward. "The woman who proved size matters." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I guess I did." He noticed she wasn't wearing a ring, not even the one her boyfriend might have given her. So he asked gently, "Did you decide?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. "I did," she said finally, "but not about the ring." Something in her tone made him curious. "Then what about—" She looked at him with a faint, knowing smile. "About what fits and what doesn't." Before Ethan could reply, she said, "Could I try that sapphire ring again?" He nodded and retrieved it from the display. She slipped it on, and again, that same quiet calm washed over her. She looked at it for a long moment, then said, "You were right. You just know when it fits." Her voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes' resolution mixed with sadness. Ethan didn't ask questions, but he understood. Some decisions speak for themselves. When she left that day, she didn't buy anything. But she walked out different, lighter somehow, as if she'd set down a heavy truth she'd been carrying for too long. Ethan watched her go, the ring still gleaming faintly under the shop light's dot as he locked up that night. He realized something simple yet profound. People often come searching for objects, but leave with answers. Lila's question hadn't been about rings or size, it had been about love, fit, and the courage to admit when something no longer feels right. And somewhere deep down, Ethan hoped she'd find the person or the life that finally did. A month had passed since Lila last visited Ethan's jewelry shop, and the quiet rhythm of his life had settled back into routine. Every morning, he opened the door, polished the glass counters, arranged the rings, and brewed coffee while watching the rain blur the streets of Seattle. But no matter how ordinary his days were, he couldn't shake the memory of her. The woman with tired eyes and a sapphire ring that had once made her smile. Ethan told himself it was just curiosity. People came and went all the time. But Lila had left an impression, not as a customer, but as a story left unfinished. He wondered if she had found what she was looking for, if the question she asked, "Does size matter?" had really been about jewelry at all. Then one Saturday afternoon, just as the shop was closing, the doorbell chimed. Ethan looked up and froze. It was her. Lila stepped inside, shaking off her umbrella. Her coat was darker this time, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked calmer, more collected, but her eyes carried a different kind of quiet. "Hey," she said softly. "I hope I'm not too late." Ethan smiled. "For you, never." How have you been?" She hesitated, then said, "Different. I moved out." The words came so simply, yet carried the weight of an ending. Ethan didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He'd seen that look before, the look of someone who had finally stopped pretending things were fine. "I'm guessing that wasn't easy," he said gently. She shook her head. "No, but staying felt worse." He nodded. "Then you did the right thing." Lila looked around the shop, her gaze landing on the display where she had tried the rings before. "It's funny," she said quietly. "I used to come here just to look at pretty things. Now it feels like this place gave me clarity." Ethan smiled softly. "Jewelry does that. It reflects the truth you're already carrying." She laughed lightly. "Or maybe it's just you." He didn't know what to say, so he changed the subject. "Are you here for something special today?" "Actually, yes." She walked over to the counter. "I want to buy that sapphire ring." He looked surprised. "The same one?" "Yes," she said. "But not for what you think." Otto wants up it carefully and handed it to her. "Can I ask what it's for?" She looked down at the ring, her fingers tracing its edges. "It's for me," she said. "No engagement, no promise, no one else involved. Just something to remind myself that I can choose what fits me, not what's expected." He smiled. "That's the best reason I've heard all year." She put the ring on, and it shimmered under the soft light, just as it had the first time. It was as if it had been waiting for her to come back. Ethan wrapped the box slowly. But as he did, he noticed her watching him, not with flirtation, but with gratitude, as if she wanted to say thank you for something bigger than a purchase. As he handed her the bag, she said, "You probably think I'm being dramatic. Buying a ring for myself." He shook his head. "Not at all. People buy flowers for themselves, don't they? Jewelry's just another way to say you matter." Leela smiled, that same gentle smile that made her eyes soften. "I like that." Before leaving, she paused near the door. "Hey, Ethan. Yeah. You said once that people just know when something fits. Do you think that's true for people too? Like relationships, friendships, even timing?" He thought for a moment. "I think it's true when both sides are honest. When you stop forcing things, the right fit feels effortless." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then maybe that's what I've been missing." Ethan wanted to ask what she meant, but she was already opening the door. The bell chimed as she left, leaving behind a faint trace of rain and jasmine perfume. Weeks turned into routine again, but not in the same way. Lila began visiting the shop more often. Sometimes she came to clean her ring, other times just to talk. She'd bring coffee, sometimes pastries, and they'd talk about everything, her design projects, his customers, small joys that made life bearable. Ethan found himself looking forward to her visits, though he never admitted it out loud. He liked the sound of her laughter echoing through the quiet store, the way she leaned against the counter when she spoke, her eyes lighting up when she talked about art. One afternoon, as rain tapped softly against the window, Lila said, "You know what's strange? When I was with Evan, he'd buy expensive things for me, but they never felt personal. You give people something simple and somehow make it meaningful." He smiled. "Maybe that's because meaning isn't in the price tag." She nodded slowly. "You're right. It's in the thought." She hesitated, then added, I used to think love was about grand gestures, big surprises, fancy dinners. But maybe it's just about being understood. Like someone seeing you for who you are and still wanting to stay." Ethan looked at her quietly. "That's rare," he said, "but it's worth waiting for." Their eyes met for a moment, just long enough for the silence to feel like a question neither wanted to ask. Then she smiled faintly and changed the subject. A few days later, she came by in the evening when the store was nearly empty. "I brought you something," she said, setting down a small brown bag. Inside was a drawing, a sketch of his jewelry counter, with sunlight pouring through the window and him standing behind it smiling faintly. "You drew this?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, slightly shy. "I thought your shop deserved to be remembered the way it feels. Calm, real, kind." Ethan was touched. "It's beautiful, Lila. Thank you." She smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You helped me remember that beauty isn't about perfection. It's about feeling something." He placed the drawing near the register where he could see it every day. "You have no idea how much this means to me," he said quietly. "I think I do," she replied. That night, long after she left, Ethan stood by the drawing, lost in thought. Something had changed between them. Something unspoken, but deep. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something gentler, something that grew from understanding and shared silences. He knew she was still healing, rebuilding herself after walking away from a life that didn't fit. And he, too, had been living quietly behind glass counters, content but disconnected. Somehow, they'd both filled each other's quiet spaces without meaning to. The next day, she came again, this time not with laughter, but with hesitation. Her eyes were red and her hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee. "What happened?" he asked softly. She took a deep breath. "Evan came by my apartment. He wanted to talk. He said he made a mistake." Ethan said nothing, just listened. "I told him I can't go back," she continued. "I finally feel like I'm becoming myself again. But part of me still feels guilty, like I'm supposed to give him another chance." Ethan leaned forward. "You don't owe him your peace, Lila." She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I just want to be sure I'm not running away from something fixable." He nodded. "Then take your time to know the difference. But don't forget, the right fit never needs to be forced." Her lips quivered into a weak smile. "You always know what to say." "Maybe because I've seen too many people settle for things that don't fit," he said gently. She reached across the counter, her fingers brushing his hand for a moment, soft, brief, but full of unspoken gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she left. That night Ethan couldn't sleep. The memory of her touch, her trembling voice, the look in her eyes, it all stayed with him. He wasn't sure what she'd decide, but he knew whatever happened, she deserved to choose freely. Days passed without her visit. The shop felt emptier. Even the radio seemed quieter. He missed her stories, her laughter, her warmth that had unknowingly filled his days. Then one morning, as the city glowed gold under the sunrise, she returned. She walked in quietly, wearing the same sapphire ring, her eyes bright and calm. "I told him no," she said softly. Ethan smiled slowly. "Good. He didn't understand," she added. "He said I've changed. And maybe I have. But I think I just finally stopped pretending." She looked down at her ring and smiled faintly. "This," she said, lifting her hand, "wasn't about jewelry. It was about choosing myself." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening with pride and something deeper. "You did the hardest thing. You listened to yourself." She smiled, and in that moment, the quiet between them felt complete. Not as a promise, not as an ending, but as the beginning of something real. Spring arrived quietly in Seattle with softer mornings and longer evenings that glowed against the wet streets. Ethan's jewelry shop, once just a place of glass and gold, had become something more, a place of meaning. It was where Leela had rediscovered herself, and where Ethan had found something he didn't know he was missing ever since. Leela's last visit, the day she said I told him no, things between them had shifted. Not with grand declarations, but with quiet understanding. She came by often now, sometimes bringing fresh flowers for the counter, sometimes just sitting with coffee while Ethan worked. Their conversations moved easily from stories about her clients to his family in Portland. It was comfortable, familiar, and unspokenly close. Yet beneath all that ease, there was a gentle uncertainty. Neither of them had said what they truly felt. Perhaps they were afraid too. After all, Lila was still rebuilding her life, and Ethan had spent years keeping his heart safely behind glass. Like one of the rings he displayed so carefully. One Friday evening, the shop was nearly empty when Lila came in wearing a light blue dress. She looked different, lighter, freer somehow. "I just came to say thank you," she said softly. Ethan looked up from his workbench. "For what?" "For reminding me I could start again." She smiled faintly. "I got a new job offer in Vancouver." It's a big opportunity. I'm leaving next month." The words hit him harder than he expected. He nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's amazing, Lila. You deserve it." She looked down, twisting the sapphire ring around her finger. "It feels right. But it's scary, too. I've built so much here." "You'll do great," he said. "You always find your way." Their eyes met, and in that quiet second, both of them knew what they weren't saying. She was leaving. And whatever had quietly grown between them would have to stay behind. Over the next few weeks, she stopped by almost every day. Sometimes she helped him close up the shop, folding the velvet cloths over the counters. Other times they shared pastries from the cafe across the street, laughing over little things. But with every shared smile came a quiet ache of time running out. One evening, as the sky dimmed to a soft gray, Lila placed a small box on the counter. "For you," she said. Ison opened it carefully. Inside was a silver keychain with a tiny sapphire stone matching her ring. "So you'll remember me," she said softly. He smiled, his throat tightening. "As if I could forget." She laughed lightly, but her voice trembled. "Promise me one thing, that you'll keep helping people find what fits them." "You're good at that," he nodded. "Only if you promise to never settle for less than what fits you." She smiled, and for a long moment they simply stood there, two people surrounded by quiet, holding something invisible but real. The day she left, Seattle was soaked in rain. Ethan opened the shop as usual, but everything felt different. The air seemed heavier, the light dimmer. He caught himself glancing toward the door more than once, half expecting her to walk in one last time when he closed up that night. He looked at the spot where she'd often stood, talking and laughing, and realized how much warmth she had brought into his simple life. It wasn't about romance or longing anymore, it was about connection. Something deeper than either of them had expected. He placed the keychain on the counter beside her drawing, the sketch of his shop bathed in sunlight, and smiled faintly. Maybe, he thought, some people don't stay forever. They just pass through to help you remember what being alive feels like. Months passed. Summer came and went. Business grew steady, but the shop still felt quieter. Ethan tried to focus on work, resizing rings, polishing necklaces, helping couples choose engagement bands. But sometimes, when someone asked about sapphire rings, his chest would tighten just a little. Then, one crisp autumn morning, he received a letter. It was postmarked from Vancouver. He opened it slowly. "Dear Ethan," it began, "I hope you're still making people smile in that little shop of yours. I miss the coffee and the quiet talks about everything and nothing. Vancouver is beautiful, but it's not easy starting over. Still, every time I feel lost, I look at my ring and remember what you said. The right fit never needs to be forced. I think I'm finally beginning to understand that, not just in love, but in life too. Thank you for helping me find that truth. Lila." Ethan read it twice. He didn't realize he was smiling until he felt it. He folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her sketch. For the first time in months, he felt something like peace. A year later, the jewelry store had grown busier. Ethan had hired a young assistant, moved some displays, even started designing his own pieces. Life had moved forward quietly, but steadily. Then, one late afternoon, as golden sunlight filled the shop, the bell above the door rang. Ethan looked up and froze. Lila stood there, smiling softly, holding her old umbrella. "Hey," she said gently, "I told you I'd come back." For a moment, he couldn't speak. "You're here," he said finally, almost in disbelief. "I moved back," she said, stepping closer. "Vancouver was good. It taught me a lot. But it didn't feel like home." Ethan smiled, warmth rising through him. "Welcome home, then." She looked around the shop, the new lights, the framed drawings she'd given him still hanging on the wall. "You've changed things," she said. "Not everything," he replied. "Some things were already perfect." Their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away. That evening, they closed the shop together. The city outside glowed softly, and for the first time, Ethan felt the quiet wasn't empty anymore. Lila stood beside him, looking at the rows of rings behind the glass. "You know," she said, smiling faintly, "I think I finally understand what you meant that day. About size not mattering." He asked. She nodded. "Yeah, it was never about the ring. It was about finding what fits, what makes you feel right inside." He smiled. "You found it." She looked at him, eyes shining. "Maybe I already did." They didn't rush anything. There was no dramatic confession, no sweeping moment. Just two people quietly finding comfort where they least expected it. They began spending evenings walking by the harbor, talking about their days. It was simple, steady, and real. Ethan realized that love didn't need to be loud to be meaningful. Sometimes it was just the way someone looked at you and made you feel seen. Lila had shown him that truth without trying, just like he had helped her see her worth again. Months later, on a soft December night, Ethan closed the shop early. He had a small box in his pocket, not for a grand proposal, but a gift that held a story. When Leela arrived, he smiled nervously and handed it to her. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a tiny sapphire charm. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's the same stone as your ring. I thought it should have company." She smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "It's perfect." He took a breath. "You once asked me if size matters. I think the truth is, it's not about size, shape, or value. It's about meaning. And you gave meaning to everything again." Lila stepped closer, resting her head gently against his shoulder. "And you showed me that the right fit feels like peace, not pressure." Outside, snow began to fall softly, settling against the shop window. Inside, they stood quietly, surrounded by the faint glow of golden light reflecting off glass and silver. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt complete, not because everything was perfect, but because it finally fit. It had been raining for 3 days straight in Portland, and Emma Sanders felt like her life matched the weather, gray, cold, and endlessly heavy. She sat at her kitchen table, a stack of unopened bills in front of her, and a rent notice pinned to the fridge. Her once neat apartment now looked tired. Dishes were piled in the sink, the curtains were half drawn, and the plants she used to love had started to wilt. She used to be the kind of person who found light in small things. But lately, even mornings felt hard to face. Emma was 32, a freelance graphic designer married for 7 years to Ryan, an engineer who seemed to have forgotten what love looked like. Their marriage used to be filled with laughter, late-night drives, and plans for a house by the lake. Now it was mostly silence. They lived like polite strangers sharing the same space, polite, distant, and endlessly tired. She told herself things would get better, but deep down, knew they were slowly falling apart. The rent was 3 weeks late. Emma had promised her landlord she would pay soon, but her client payment had been delayed again. Every morning she told herself she would figure something out. Every night she ended up staring at the same overdue notice. When she heard a knock on the door one rainy evening, her heart dropped. She already knew who it was. When she opened the door, Mark Reynolds, her landlord, stood there tall, composed, and holding a clipboard. But his expression wasn't cold or angry. It was concerned. Mark was in his late 30s, quiet but warm in a way that made people feel safe. He had taken over the apartment building after his father passed away. And everyone liked him because he cared. He fixed things himself, remembered birthdays, and always greeted people by name. "Hi, Emma," he said gently. "I just wanted to check in about the rent. Is everything okay?" She hesitated, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "It's been a hard month," she said quietly. "Work's been slow. I'm waiting on a payment." He nodded. "I figured it might be something like that. You don't usually fall behind." Something about his calm tone made her relax a little. He wasn't there to scold her. He looked around the apartment, noticing the dim light, the unopened mail, the untouched dinner on the counter. "You've had better days," he said softly. Emma gave a small, tired laugh. "That obvious, huh?" He smiled faintly. "You used to come down to the garden every morning. Haven't seen you there in a while." The way he said it caught her off guard. He noticed that. She hadn't realized anyone had. That little garden used to be her favorite place, where she sketched, drank coffee, and felt the world slow down. But lately she had stopped going. Mark stayed a few more minutes, talking not like a landlord but like a friend. He didn't rush her or offer empty words. When he left, he said quietly, "Don't stress too much, okay? I'll hold off on the late fees. Just let me know if you need anything fixed around here." When the door closed, Emma leaned against it, exhaling. For the first time in weeks, someone had spoken to her with kindness, not pity, not annoyance, just kindness. Later that night, when Ryan came home, she mentioned that Mark had stopped by. "He's being patient about the rent," she said, hoping Ryan would understand the relief she felt. But Ryan barely looked up from his phone. "You should have paid it weeks ago," he muttered. "I told you to plan better." Emma didn't argue. She just nodded, though her chest ached. They hadn't had a real conversation in months. Even when they sat on the same couch, they felt miles apart. She missed the way he used to hold her hand when watching movies, how he used to make her laugh when she was stressed. Now, they only shared silence. The next morning, when she went downstairs to check the mailbox, she found a small potted plant on her doorstep. A note attached to read, "For your window. Thought your apartment could use some color? Mark." She stood there for a long moment, the cold air brushing against her skin. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than she could say. She placed the plant on her kitchen windowsill, right where the sunlight touched in the morning. For the first time in a while, she smiled. Over the next week, Mark came by twice to check on maintenance, a dripping faucet, a squeaky window hinge. He worked quietly, sleeves rolled up, his manner calm and unhurried. Emma offered him coffee each time, and they talked while he worked. He told her about his father, about how he grew up fixing things around the same building. She told him about her design work, her love for painting, how she used to dream of opening a small art studio one day. There was nothing improper in their conversations. It's just two people talking. But something soft and complicated began to grow in the quiet between words. It wasn't love, not yet. It was recognition, a sense that someone finally saw her again. One evening, after another long day of silence with Ryan, she received a text from Mark. "How's the plant doing?" She smiled and replied, "Still alive." "That's an achievement in my house lately," he texted back. "I'll take that as good news." Then, after a pause, another message came. "By the way, don't worry about this month's rent. We'll sort it out next time. Just focus on getting back on your feet." Emma stared at her phone, unsure how to respond. No one had shown her that kind of grace in a long time. She typed a dozen replies before settling on, "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to," he replied. Sometimes kindness doesn't need words. That night she couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped and the city lights shimmered on the wet streets below. She stood by her window, looking at the plant Mark had given her. For the first time in months, she felt something stir inside. Not excitement, but aliveness. The next morning she woke up early, made coffee, and walked down to the garden. The air was crisp and the flowers were glistening from the rain. As she sat on the bench, she saw Mark in the distance, fixing the gate. He looked up, surprised to see her. She waved. He smiled. It was small, simple, but it warmed her more than she expected. From that day, she started spending her mornings there again. Sometimes Mark joined her with coffee. Sometimes they just exchanged smiles from across the yard. Emma began to feel lighter. Yet deep down, she also felt a quiet guilt she couldn't name. Ryan was still her husband. Even if they were distant, even if he didn't seem to care. The ring on her finger still meant something. But then came the night everything changed. Ryan was working late again. And Emma was sitting by the window when the power went out in the building. The whole street went dark. A few minutes later, she heard a knock. When she opened the door, Mark was standing there with a flashlight. "Just checking everyone's okay," he said. "The power line's down. Should be back soon." "Thanks," she said softly, holding the door open. The beam of his flashlight reflected off her face, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Mark looked at her, his voice quieter now. "Emma, you don't have to carry everything alone. You know that, right?" Her throat tightened. Sometimes I don't have a choice. He nodded slowly, eyes full of something she couldn't name. Empathy, warmth, maybe longing. You always have a choice, he said. Then he stepped back into the hallway, leaving her with his words echoing in her heart. That night, Emma lay awake long after the power returned, staring at the ceiling. She knew she was standing at the edge of something she hadn't asked for, something dangerous, but something that made her feel alive again. She didn't know if it was wrong or inevitable. She only knew that when Mark looked at her. She didn't feel invisible anymore, and that realization scared her more than anything else. After the power outage, something between Emma and Mark quietly shifted. They didn't talk about it, but they both felt it. It wasn't a confession or an act, just a shared understanding that went deeper than either of them expected. Emma started noticing things she hadn't before. The way his voice softened when he spoke to her. The way he looked at her like he was seeing someone he didn't want to lose. The next few days passed quietly. Ryan was busier than ever, leaving early, coming home late. He said it was for a work project, but he barely spoke to her even when he was home. Emma stopped trying to fill the silence. She used to ask about his day, cook dinner, make small talk. Now she just moved around him like a shadow. One Friday morning she went down to the garden again. The air smelled of wet earth and lavender. She sat on the old wooden bench, sketchbook in hand, pretending to draw while her mind drifted. She didn't expect Mark to come by, but he did. He was carrying a toolbox, fixing the fence that separated the property from the sidewalk. "Morning," he said, looking up with a smile that made her forget the chill in the air. "Morning," she replied softly. He worked quietly, but every now and then their eyes met. It was strange how silence between them felt easy, not uncomfortable. When he finished, he came to sit beside her on the bench. "I forgot how peaceful it is here," he said, looking around. Emma smiled faintly. "You own the place and never come down." He shrugged. "I used to. Then life got busy. You know how that goes." She nodded, tracing lines in her sketchbook. "Yeah, I know exactly how that goes." They sat like that for a while, two people who didn't need to explain their loneliness. Before he left, he asked, "Are you doing okay?" She wanted to lie, to say she was fine, but she couldn't. "I'm trying," she admitted. He gave a quiet nod, as if he understood more than she said. That evening, Ryan came home late again. He smelled faintly of perfume, not hers. Emma didn't say anything. She just looked at him, and for a moment she thought she saw guilt flicker in his eyes. But then he turned away, tossing his jacket on the chair. "Don't start," he muttered. She didn't. Instead, she went to bed early, tears burning in her eyes but never falling. She had cried too much over him already. The next morning she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a note. "The fence is fixed. Thought you might like some company for coffee later?" No pressure. Her heart raced as she read it. It wasn't romantic, at least not on paper. But there was something about the way he wrote "no pressure" that felt gentle, patient, and human, something she hadn't felt in years. Later that afternoon, she walked down to the little cafe at the corner of the street. Mark was already there, sitting by the window with 2 cups on the table. He looked up and smiled when she walked in, like he'd been waiting just for her. They talked for hours about work, about family, about everything and nothing. She told him how she had once dreamed of opening a small art studio, but life had taken her in another direction. He told her how he'd never really planned to be a landlord, but ended up taking over after his father's death. There was something freeing about talking to someone who didn't expect her to be perfect when she finally stood to leave. Mark reached out, just brushing her hand. It wasn't deliberate, just a moment that hung between them. She felt warmth rush through her, and it scared her. "Thanks for the coffee," she said. Stepping back? "Any time," he replied quietly as she walked home. She couldn't stop thinking about that brief touch. It wasn't wrong, not really, but it wasn't right either. She loved Ryan, or at least she thought she still did. But what kind of love was left when you were invisible in your own marriage? Days turned into weeks, and her conversations with Mark became more frequent. Sometimes they texted about simple things: the leaky pipe, the garden, the weather. But other times, their messages drifted into something deeper. He asked how she was sleeping. She asked how his week was going. It felt natural, easy. One evening, she found him in the parking lot fixing a tenant's broken light. She brought him a thermos of coffee without thinking. He looked surprised but grateful. "You didn't have to," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. When he took the thermos, their fingers brushed again, and this time neither of them looked away. There was a quiet storm in that glance, one of longing, guilt, and understanding all mixed together. After that night, Emma avoided him for days, afraid of what she was feeling. She threw herself into work, trying to ignore the pull in her chest. But every time she passed by the window, she found herself looking for him. Then came the night everything changed again. Ryan didn't come home. He sent a text saying he was working late. It was almost midnight when Emma gave up waiting. The silence of the apartment felt unbearable. She stepped outside just to breathe, wrapping her sweater around her shoulders. The lights in Mark's office were still on. He saw her and stepped out. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, it's been one of those nights." He nodded, walking closer. "You look like you've been holding everything in for too long." She laughed bitterly. "That's probably true." For a while, they just stood there under the dim porch light. Then she said quietly, "I feel like I'm losing myself, Mark. Every day a little more." He looked at her with eyes full of empathy. "You're not lost. You're just stuck. It happens." "Maybe," she said, her voice trembling. "But what if I can't find my way back?" Mark took a small step closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool air. "Then maybe you stop trying to go back," he said softly. "Maybe you start moving forward." Emma looked up at him, and in that moment, every wall she had built around herself cracked a little. There was no kiss, no confession, just a long, aching silence that said everything they couldn't. Finally, she stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should go." He nodded slowly. "Good night, Emma." "Good night," she said, turning away before he could see the tears in her eyes. That night, she sat on her bed, staring at her wedding ring. It felt heavy, like a reminder of promises that no longer had meaning. She wasn't proud of her feelings. She didn't want to betray anyone. But she couldn't deny that Mark had become the only person who made her feel alive again. The next morning, she woke up to another note under her door. "Didn't mean to make last night awkward. I just care about you." She smiled sadly, running her thumb over the words. She didn't reply, but she didn't throw the note away either. She kept it in her drawer, a quiet secret she wasn't ready to face. Days passed. Ryan came and went like a ghost, barely noticing her silence. Emma stopped trying to explain herself to him. She stopped expecting warmth where there was none. Mark, on the other hand, didn't push. He gave her space, but his presence was always there. Small gestures, quiet looks, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. Then, one Sunday afternoon, she saw him in the parking lot again. Their eyes met, and this time, she didn't look away. She walked up to him and said softly, "Thank you. For everything. For seeing me." He looked at her for a long moment. "You deserve to be seen, Emma." And though neither of them said it, they both knew this was no longer just kindness. It was something else. Something that would test every boundary they had left. As Emma walked back to her apartment, her heart was a storm, guilt, confusion, and a fragile kind of hope she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know where this path would lead. But she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't undo. For days after that Sunday, Emma couldn't think straight. Every sound, every quiet moment in her apartment reminded her of Mark, the way he looked at her, the gentleness in his words, the safety she felt near him. All of it replayed in her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. She told herself to stop, to focus on her marriage, to fix what was broken. But how do you fix something that one person has already stopped caring about? Ryan had grown distant beyond reach. He no longer noticed the little changes, the new haircut, the dinner she made, or the tired look in her eyes. When she spoke, he answered with one-word replies. When she smiled, he didn't even look up. It wasn't anger that filled her now, it was emptiness. A quiet kind of loneliness that made her question if she still existed in his world. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to understand her without words. Every time they spoke, it felt like he saw through her defenses. He never pushed, never asked for anything, but his kindness was enough to stir something deep inside her. It wasn't about rent anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about connection, something she had been starving for. One evening, she came home to find Ryan packing an overnight bag. "I'm heading to Seattle," he said flatly. "Work trip. I'll be back in 2 days." Emma nodded, trying to sound casual. "Okay, have a safe trip." He gave a short nod, grabbed his keys, and left. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed in the apartment. She stood there for a long time, realizing how used to his absence she had become. That night she couldn't sleep. Her mind raced between guilt and relief. She needed to get out, breathe, think. Without realizing it, she found herself walking toward the garden. The sky was overcast and the city was quiet. She sat on the bench, staring at the flowers she used to care for, when a familiar voice broke the silence. "Couldn't sleep either?" Mark asked softly. She looked up to see him standing there, hands in his pockets. "No," she said. "It's been one of those nights again." He nodded and sat beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was cool and the only sound was the soft rustle of leaves. Finally, he said, "I don't want to make things harder for you, Emma." "You haven't," she said quickly. "You've been the only person who's made things easier." Mark turned to her, his eyes calm but filled with emotion. "That's not true. I've made it complicated." She shook her head. "No, you've been kind. You've listened. That's not complicated." "That's human," he sighed, looking away. "I'm not proud of how I feel," he admitted quietly, "but I can't pretend I don't care about you." The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Emma's heart pounded. She didn't answer right away. She couldn't. She just looked at him, her throat tight. Finally, she said softly, "You're not the only one." Mark looked at her, searching her face for what she meant. "Emma," he began, but she cut him off. "I don't know when it happened," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe it was the day you brought that plant, or when you fixed the faucet. But you made me feel seen again. And that scared me more than anything." Mark's hand tightened on the bench like he was fighting the urge to reach for her. "You deserve to be seen," he said. "You deserve to be loved the right way." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "The right way," she repeated quietly. "I don't even know what that feels like anymore." They sat there in silence, both knowing that one wrong word could cross a line they couldn't return from. Finally, Emma stood. "I should go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good night, Emma." "Good night," she said. Oh, it didn't feel like goodbye. She walked back to her apartment with her heart pounding and her thoughts spinning. Inside, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the plant by the window. It had grown stronger, greener, like it had been cared for. She wondered if that's all people really needed. Care, attention, a reason to bloom again. The next morning, she woke up early, restless. She went for a walk around the block, trying to clear her head. The city was waking up slowly. Coffee shops opening, cars passing by. She realized how small her world had become, her apartment, her fading marriage, and the quiet ache of wanting more. When she returned, she found Mark standing near her door, holding an envelope. "I was just dropping this off," he said, startled to see her. "What is it?" She asked. "Your lease renewal," he said quickly. "It's due next week." "I didn't mean to bother you." She took the envelope, their fingers brushing again. That simple touch felt heavier now, filled with all the things they hadn't said. "You're never a bother," she said softly. Mark hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "Emma, you don't have to renew if you don't want to. Sometimes a change of place helps you breathe again." His words hit her like a wave. "You think I should leave?" she asked. He shook his head. "I think you should choose what brings you peace." That night, she sat on the floor, surrounded by bills, her lease papers, and the note he'd once left her. For the first time, she admitted the truth to herself. She wasn't in love with Ryan anymore. She had been holding on to a memory, not a marriage. What she felt for Mark wasn't wrong because it was real. It was wrong because it happened too late. The next day, Ryan came home from Seattle. He was distracted, barely making eye contact. When Emma asked about the trip, he gave vague answers. Finally, she asked quietly, "Are you seeing someone else?" Ryan froze, then sighed. "Emma, things haven't been right between us for a long time." She waited, her chest tight. "So that's a yes." He nodded slightly. "I didn't plan it. It just happened." Emma felt her heart ache, but not in the way she expected. It wasn't betrayal that hurt, it was confirmation of what she already knew. Their love had ended long before this moment. "I think we should end this before we hurt each other more," she said quietly. Ryan didn't argue. He simply nodded, almost relieved. "Maybe you're right." That night, Emma packed a small bag and stayed in a motel. She sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling this strange calm that comes after a storm. It wasn't joy, but it was freedom. The next morning, she returned to the apartment only to find Mark waiting outside, looking worried. "I heard from one of the neighbors that you left last night," he said. "Are you okay?" Emma nodded. "I'm fine. Ryan and I are done." Mark didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. "It was time." They stood there, the morning light spilling between them. Everything felt new, fragile, uncertain, but honest. Mark took a step closer. "You don't owe me anything, Emma. Not rent, not explanations. But I need to tell you something before you go." She looked at him, her heart beating faster. He took a breath. "I didn't help you because I wanted anything in return. I did it because I saw someone worth helping. Someone who deserved more than she was getting." Her eyes softened. "And what if I want to stay?" she asked quietly. Mark smiled faintly. "Then stay. But stay for you, not for me." That simple line broke something open inside her. A truth she had been avoiding. For the first time in years, she realized she didn't need someone to save her. She just needed to choose herself. Over the next few weeks, Emma found a small art studio downtown. She started painting again, taking on new clients, and filling her days with purpose. Ryan moved out of the city, and they parted peacefully. There was no anger, just acceptance that their story had ended. Mark remained in her life, but this time without confusion. They met for coffee, shared laughter, and built a friendship that felt grounded and real. The spark between them was still there. But they both knew that sometimes the best love begins only after healing. One evening, months later, Emma stood by her apartment window, watching the sunset. The same plant Mark had given her was now full of green leaves, thriving. She smiled softly, realizing it mirrored her own growth. Her phone buzzed a message from Mark. "Coffee? Tomorrow." She replied, "Only if you promise not to bring a lease this time." His response came quickly. "Deal?" Emma laughed quietly. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. Sometimes love doesn't come to rescue you. It comes to remind you that you're capable of saving yourself. And as the city lights flickered to life outside her window, Emma knew one thing for certain. She had finally found her way back to herself.